Hello, everyone. So I'm excited to talk about questions tonight. So I try once a month during the school year to do these office hours for anyone in the courses or even not in the courses who wants to be part of a gifted community, chat with other gifted education people, get ideas, share ideas. And so that's what this is. And tonight, particularly, the questions that I got were about questions. So if you're not familiar with this, I have a whole course on how to write good questions. And I got these questions from a couple of people who are in that course who wanted me to look at their questions and give them some feedback on their questions. And I love that because I love it when people are engaging in professional development in a way that's actually developing them, right? And so, not that I'm the total expert, although I've spent a lot of time trying to become an expert on asking questions, but it's just another voice. It's just another set of eyes on it. So I do want to talk about their questions, but I also want to answer any questions that you have, either about questions, questioning students, effective questioning practices, or anything related to gifted ed. It's all on the table tonight. So I'm going to add, and I can see this is the first time I've ever streamed onto LinkedIn as well. But if you're on Facebook or YouTube, I can see your comments here. I can't post comments to LinkedIn, I know, but I can post comments to the other places. So feel free to ask questions. And thank you if you're just joining me. So I'm Lisa. If you're just joining me, you don't know me, I'm Lisa, and I'm excited to be here tonight. So I'm going to share my screen here so we can see these questions, and hopefully you can see this. Let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. There we go. Okay. So this is the first set of questions that I got. And you can see this is a question development workshop. It's part of the course. That's what this is. And so we're working in a good, better, best modality where you start with a good question and that's your first go at it, and you try to make it a little bit better, and then you try to make it best. And so one of the things that I think is super important about questioning, in fact, I think the thing that most teachers don't do that's critical is set a goal for the question. When you're asking students a question, what is it that you're hoping that the question will do? What's the question's job? Every question needs a job. If you don't have a job for the question, then you'll never know whether your question is really effective. So that's the first thing. So in this case, I always say, I want the teacher to know, what do you want the students to think, feel, believe, do, or prepare, or like be able to do as a result of this question that you've asked and this engagement with you in questions. And so that's what you see here, where it says under believe, figurative language is accessible to all. And so whenever we're going to gauge the quality of a question, we're going to go back to that job and how well does this question do that job. Okay, so I have a STEM bank that they're given in the class. And so she starts with, what does spring fever mean, in the second paragraph? Okay, so this is a basic question about figurative language, right? The author uses the phrase spring fever. You have to know what that is. It's to some extent what we would call shibboleth, which is the Yiddish word for insider knowledge, right? And so the good version, right? What does spring fever mean, in the second paragraph? And can you use this term to describe anything else? I actually really like that question. It's an application opportunity. So you have this question, what does this mean? And one of the ways you can check for understanding is to ask them, how else could they use it? So that's fine. Inside baseball, nice. Yes, I think you could use spring fever also in other ways, which is like, you can use spring fever as a more metaphorical sense of like, I need to clean my house, but I have spring fever and I want to go do something else instead, right? So we could use it more colloquially. So Christina's pulled up this nice, more literal meaning, which is great. And that's where most of our students are going to go to. And so it's perfect. All right. And then the better. What type of figurative language is spring fever? How can you use a different type of figurative language to convey the same meaning? So I love this question. It is a stronger question. I would say that you would probably need to scaffold this question, this better revision, with that original one, that good one. Because if they don't know what spring fever means, they're not going to be able to do this. And so sometimes when I see teachers do this good, better, best iteration in their question workshop, sometimes I think, and maybe I've given the impression that you just discard your good version, your first shot. Often that will be a foundational question that you ask, and then you move forward in that into deeper questions. So those become like fundamental questions. And sometimes I don't even do it as a question. Sometimes I would say something like, in the second paragraph, the author says spring fever. Is spring fever this or this? And I give them two choices. Or I might say, remember that spring fever is XYZ, and this is where that phrase came from. So I might actually set the stage with that known knowledge and not waste a question. Every time you ask a question in class, you're making a withdrawal from your student relationship bank. Just like how they talk about that in like pop psychology, that if you're in a relationship with somebody, you have to make deposits in your relationship bank and you can make withdrawals. And if somebody makes too many withdrawals, then that's a problem. And so I think that's something to keep in mind with questioning. Questioning is an ask, right? Questioning is an ask. And so if you're constantly giving a lot of asks and you're not giving back, you're making too many withdrawals from the relationship bank account. Now, good questions can build relationships as well. But for most students, being asked questions, even in a classroom where they feel safe, even in a classroom where the teacher is great, those students are still going to feel a little bit more level of nervousness than they would if they're just sitting there and the teacher's showing a PowerPoint or reading a story or working some problem on the board, right? There's a different burden on the student to engage. So even if they're enjoying themselves, it's still an ask. And so I try to limit questions to ones that are really going to move the needle. So I may, in this instance, kind of give the base knowledge so that I can move forward. Because this second question, this what type of figurative language is spring fever? So that's a lower level question than the second part, which is how can you use a different type of figurative language to convey the same meaning? We'd have to see the paragraph to know what we would use. All right, let's look at the best one. She says, why is it important to set the tone of the piece with "In May, spring fever struck"? Do you think the story would be different if it had happened in a different time of year? So I think that what I might do is change that. So there's actually two questions here in this best one. And I'm looking at these fresh right now. I didn't want to spend a bunch of time analyzing it and having kind of like an unfair advantage. I'm just going to look at this right here. So what I would say is that these are two completely different questions. The first one, the why is it important to set the tone of the piece with "In May, spring fever struck," I may ask a slightly different question there. The way that authors begin stories is in large part in order to either create suspense, which can also be connected to these, or set tone or mood, which suspense can be part of that as well. But the author has a purpose in the way they set the story. So what I may do, rather than say, why is it important to set the tone of the piece with this, I may say, what kind of tone was set? Or I may say, did this create more suspense or curiosity? And go there, right? By what tone would you argue is most created by this question? And then this last one, do you think the story would be different? Instead of saying, do you think the story would have been different, which is a yes or no question, what you would say is, how could the author have started this story in order to create the same tone had the story happened in the fall or in the summer or in the winter, right? So ask them to actually create it rather than asking them a yes or no question. So yes or no questions are always the kiss of death. We never want to ask a yes or no question, because guess what? They answer yes or no, right? They answer yes or no. All right, let me go look at the next. Let's look at the next one, next question. So here, she wants the students to do is to think about the incident they'll use to write their personal narrative, and believe that they can learn from their own experiences. And then she wants them to prepare to write a lesson that Walter learned from one of his mistakes. So they're reading a story, right? So the starter, how is your story similar to Walter's? So one of the things I would say is probably you're going to need to dial that down. Probably that question would need to be dialed down more specifically. Like, how is your family life like Walter's? Or how is your work life like Walter's? Or how is your school life like Walter's? Or how is your vacation like Walter's? Or how is the way you feel about X like Walter? If you just say, how is your story similar to Walter's? That's a little bit too broad. We'll want to dial down. So let's see where she goes from there. Her good revision. What are some similarities and differences you and Walter's stories share? Yes, I would say, what are similarities and differences that your story and Walter's story share? And that is a good one in, right? And that is a dial in. Some similarities and differences. I may even, well, let's see where she goes with this, and then I may come back to that. Okay, better. Walter wrote this story when he was an adult. Looking back on his childhood, what do you think your adult self would say about this incident? So rather than ask that, I might strengthen that question by just saying, how would the way you looked at it as an adult be the same or different than Walter's? Rather than what would your adult self say? I would ask for a more compare contrast that included similarities and differences, just like this was done in the good one, in the good level question. And then best, how could you and Walter apply what you've learned to future situations? So that's not a bad question, but I'm not sure that it's really an iteration of the first two. I think this takes it in a completely different way. Now, one of the things when you're working on revising your questions is that you'll sometimes find that your questions, as you're working on questions, you're coming up with more questions. You're not necessarily improving or judging that initial question you had, but you may be actually coming up with a whole different question, which is perfectly fine. I think in this case, that's what you did. If I were going to make this, if I were going to ask a question along these lines, and I'm not actually sure which story she's talking about, but if I were going to do this, I would probably ask something like, what is the most important lesson Walter learned that is applicable to your life? So that's probably how I would iterate this one. All right, let's look at another one. And if any of you have thoughts on these questions, I would love to see them in the comments, what you think. Okay, so this is digital. Obviously, this is a Google slide, so that's why you're seeing some of this text here. Analyze how Martha grows from her experience, and she wants them to believe that experience can shape and change us. All right, so starter, what does the author want us to understand about her story? Okay, how does Martha change from the beginning of the story to the end? Okay, that's good. If you do depth of complexity, that's a very basic change over time question. You could strengthen that just by saying, what is the most important way that Martha changes over time? How does the goal of the scholarship jacket change from a physical goal to a metaphorical goal? And how does this change Martha's tactics to get what she wants? Okay, so that is a shocking jump from the good question to the better question. It's a much stronger question. Of course, it's two. Now we've got a set of two questions, but they're both really good. I like the idea of like, let's look at the goal and then how does it change Martha's tactics? You may even, depending on the story, you may even go into if it changes the conflict in the story, because I'm guessing it might, especially if there's any kind of internal conflict. All right. And then best, Martha's treated unfairly. How does it feel when we are treated unfairly? And does this change how we try to achieve our own goals? Okay. So first, I like the way you say Martha is treated unfairly. I think that all too often we ask too many questions. Like I said, we make too many withdrawals from that relationship bank. And so just saying it flat out, Martha is treated unfairly. And then we can work with that, right? We're giving students something to work with. I'm less happy with the last one. Does this change how we try to achieve our own goals? I think you're going to still have to have that better question before you can ask this, right? So I think that you would need the better and the best level. But together, I think this is a nice set of questions. I don't see this best as an iteration of the better. but they're good questions. So hopefully those of you who these aren't your questions, but you're joining in this live stream right now or watching the video later, I hope what you're seeing here is that we as teachers have to confront our questions. That when we're looking at questions that we write, a lot of times we're given questions in our curriculum document, or we write some questions and we don't really think about them beyond writing them. And I think what the question course tries to do is force us to look at our questions more deeply and see, are they really achieving their goal? I think that those best questions are definitely achieving that goal of inviting students to believe that our experience can shape and change us. I would probably follow this up with a writing prompt that asks a question of something like, when was a time that you were treated unfairly and it changed your actions or your path or your course or how you handle a situation? So there's a beautiful segue into a writing prompt here, which of course, as an English teacher, I just can't get enough writing prompts. Okay, let's look at another one here. We'll look at one more of these and then we're going to go to another teacher. I got questions from a couple different teachers. I'd love to see in the chat any of your thoughts on these questions. All right, so here in this one, they need to be prepared to do an exercise where they write down all the different types of figurative language that they know. So for those of you who aren't language arts teachers, there's a set of figurative language devices that we're really familiar with, right? Simile, metaphor, personification. But depending on the grade level that the teacher is working with, there's a huge suite of them. I think I have a resource I created that's a figurative language, like secret picture puzzle tile activity. And I think I have like 80 different figurative language, because there's anaphora, synecdoche, like you can get into some pretty sophisticated ones if you're teaching like AP Lit or AP Lang. Okay, so starter from the bank. What are some examples of figurative language in a story? Okay, that's fine, right? Basic question. Good. Using an example of figurative language in the story, can you rewrite it as a different type with the same meaning? So that's nice, right? Like, so find sensory language and turn it into a metaphor, or turn a simile into a metaphor, or turn personification into zoomorphism or something like that. So I like that. That is a task. And tasks and questions are often interchangeable. Next, find an example of a metaphor in the story and use it to write the beginning of an entirely new story. That is a great activity. I don't think it's an iteration of this question. But because it's not just remember that the goal here was to get them to do the creativity skill of fluency, coming up with lots and lots and lots of ideas. Here we're just taking one, and we're taking a fairly basic one at that. So I don't know that this activity prompt, this writing prompt, which I think is excellent, I don't know that it moves the needle for the purpose here. Okay, and then this one didn't get finished. Okay, so I'm going to stop that one, and I am going to share the other one. So let me go grab that tab. Okay. So I was hoping that some of you would have thoughts on these as well, so it wouldn't just be me like giving this person a hard time. Okay, and I'm not trying to give a hard time. Hopefully it doesn't come across that way. I am so grateful to them for reaching out to me and asking questions. And so I love that. They specifically asked my advice, so I'm trying to help. Now, one thing that's important to know about this particular teacher here is that she's using depth and complexity, and she's just getting started with depth and complexity. And so you're going to see that in this. Okay, so what does she want the students to think? She wants them to think about resources that make the library valuable, and she wants them to feel empowered to use and value the library space. So maybe she's a librarian. So started from the STEM bank. What are the most important parts or features of our library? Now, that question is only a decent question if the students know the library. So if they don't know the library, they're not going to know what the most important parts or features are. I actually like a little different spin on this question for this particular purpose with the library by saying, what do you think is the most important of the library, the most important feature of the library that the fewest people know about or use, right? Just ratchet that up to an even stronger evaluation level in Bloom's. Okay, a good revision. How do the books, makerspace materials, and teachers in the library help everyone learn? I think now this question is going to get changed, but I think this is too broad. I would separate these out, right? How do the, and I might just asking how do the books help people learn is going to be too low level of a question, which is why it's at the good level. But you could say, which of these helps people learn best? The books, the teachers, or the makerspace materials? What do you learn the most from? And what do you think most kids learn the most from? Okay, next, the better iteration. What resources in the library contribute most to maximum learning for our school family? So that's kind of where I was going with that. I do feel like the question is a little bit maximum learning for our school family feels a little contrite, like it's not how we really talk. So one of the things that's important when you're writing a question is to the greatest extent possible, write a question in the way that you actually speak. Try as best you can not to use like teacher speak or textbook speak. Try to talk how you would speak. So you might say like, now she's using contribution as a, which is one of the content imperatives from Depth and Complexity. You don't even have to use the word contribute to be contribution, right? But let's see, what resources contribute most to maximum learning for our school family? How could I say that in a more casual tone? What resources contribute the most in library? Which resources are pulling their weight the most, or which resources are pulling the most weight here? Which ones are bearing the burden, the greatest burden? And then what resources in the library contribute the most for maximum learning in our school family? That was the same. What resources contribute least or could be replaced? So I like that idea of a comparison and contrast. In fact, I may set this one up like as a Venn diagram, resources that contribute the most, resources that contribute the least, and then in the middle, ones that are kind of shared. So that's a possibility. I'm not loving this. I'm not loving this. It's not bad. There's nothing wrong with it. But I don't know that these questions are going to have the power that you want students to have. And in order to do that you want the questions to have with students. And I think in order to do that, what you're going to need to do is to make it a little more gut punchy. So something like, if our school caught fire and I could only grab 3 things out of this library, what should I grab? Right? Like give it a scenario, make it a little bit more personal to them, because it's still just a little formal sounding. All right, let's look at another set. Okay, so she wants them to think from an empathetic perspective about ownership and agency of shared library resources. So again, a librarian, and the library is a community space, right? She wants them to believe that the library is a community space so that they will take care of it. You know, the library is an interesting thing in a school because it's not like a classroom. In a classroom, all the kids know who's using that classroom. In a library, because everybody's using it, you get that no snowflake in an avalanche ever feels responsible situation where people don't always feel ownership of it because so many people are using it. So let's see what she's got going here. How would you feel if a library book you wanted to borrow went missing? That's a great question. Imagine you walk into the library excited about a book you've been waiting weeks to check out, but it has been lost. What 3 emotion words best describe how you would feel, and what would you do? Okay, I love this. You just did exactly what I said on the last question, which is create a scenario. You just did it. This is beautiful. Next, create a missing person poster about a lost library book. Include specific emotional language and a plan to find the book. Okay, so I don't know that that's really a question, but what a cool assignment. I love this assignment. Like, can we put a library book on a milk carton? I mean, what a cool visual that a librarian could do is just put a bunch of milk carton, like fake milk carton mock-ups in a window with missing library books on them. I love this. Okay, write an open letter from the perspective of a lost library book and include specific vocabulary to evoke emotion. So the include specific vocabulary to invoke emotion is a little teacher speaky, but because this is a writing prompt as opposed to just an oral question, then that's okay. So what I said about informality doesn't really apply as much if the question's written. If we're having a dialogue, we want to speak in a casual tone. When we're giving a writing prompt or an assignment prompt, we can get a little bit more formal. I still, though, write an open letter from the perspective of a library book. I may say something like, be sure to include emotion words so we know how the library book is feeling, right? You could still make it a little more approachable. This is one of the things I think sometimes that gets our reluctant writers, but these are super fun. All right, let me do just a couple more of these. And then I don't know if maybe there's something, as soon as this live stream's over, I'm going to jump and look at the recording because I'm not seeing any comments other than Christina's comment. So I'm concerned that maybe I'm not seeing them and there's questions. So if someone wants to take pity on me and throw a comment in there so I can know whether they are. Normally my husband's in the live stream at the same time, but he's doing another job for me right now. He's in the family room working on something else for me, the poor guy. Okay, so let's look at this one. She wants the students to think about the expectations in the library space and with library materials. And she wants them to prepare to create visual reminders of library expectations. And so she's starting with, are the rules the same for every person who uses the library? And that's a good question, right? Because teachers don't have the same rules as students. What are the 3 important rules in the library? I would say, what are the 3 most important rules in the library? Are they the same for all users? Good question. When might the rules in the library differ for certain individuals or in certain situations? I don't think that question's any different. I think the second part of this, is it fair that the rules vary? Okay, I'm still not seeing a comment. So I'm hoping that somebody took pity on me and I just still can't see them. Okay, so I guess I'm just not seeing them. Create, okay, I like the second part. Is it fair that the rules vary, or why is it fair? I would maybe combine that. I feel like the first part of the better isn't really any different. Create an award for the most important rule in the library. I love this so much. Include a rationale with at least 3 reasons why that rule wins most important. That is so fun. This is really good. So one of the things I want to point out about this, and this teacher who's doing this librarian who's doing this, first of all, I love that. Like, I would give anything to have had this librarian on any campus I've ever been at. She's amazing, clearly amazing librarian. And I love this. I love how she's using depth and complexity in the library, because a lot of people just resist depth and complexity if they're not like a standard teacher. But I like the way that her questions are iterating. What I would say is that I feel like they're going from questions that would be asked orally to questions that are for a task. And I get that that's the preparation for an activity. But what I would say is, if we're going to ask questions to prepare for an activity, we're going to want to ask a couple more questions or lay the foundation a little bit more. And so we may want to refine those good questions and separate that from the task. So iterate your good questions into better questions or best questions even before you create the question that's the task. Because I feel like we need to bifurcate that. Okay, let me do, I said I was going to do one last one. Okay, so I won't do any more. I'll do those. So these teachers did a really good job. So let me, I'm going to remove that from the stream. So I'm sorry that for some reason the comments weren't working tonight, so I couldn't see your questions. I'll look at them, and for next month's office hours, I will be sure to ask any questions that were put here, because obviously all of this will still be up on YouTube and Facebook. I don't know if LinkedIn does it. This was a brand new thing I was able to do. What I hope that you've taken away from this is the idea that questioning is important, and that we can get better at questions, and that there's some interesting things that happen pedagogically in our own minds as teachers, and we become better teachers when we think deeply about our own questions. Better stuff happens in class. I feel like the reason I created the questioning course actually was because an administrator in a San Antonio school district asked me, she was at a training I was doing with Ian Bird on depth and complexity. And she said, I want you to come train my teachers how to write questions because you just think of questions on your feet. And I had never really thought about it before, but really that is to me the key skill of teaching. There's no pedagogical skill more important than that of questioning. It doesn't matter what else you can do. You can questioning, creating questions is probably 20% of my lesson planning. And I don't think that there's anything you could do. Like if you don't have good questions, I don't think it matters what you did instead, because nothing else will matter if you don't have good questions. Good questions are the heart and soul, the lifeblood of a classroom community. They're the thing that gets kids answering. Those are the things that are going to get the gifted kids answering, willing to answer, not just trying to answer a question at the very beginning and then check out for the rest of the class. So getting good at questions is probably the most important thing you could do. And what's nice about it is it's instantly rewarding. You don't have to wait. As soon as you start asking good questions, your students will pay you back with engagement. And so that's what I think is important. I threw in the description a link to where you can get, if you want to take the questioning course, where you could get it at my insider discount, which is what I usually reserve only for people on my email list. But I'm just going to let anybody have it who wants it. So if you're interested in it, you may want to go ahead and check it out. You can poke around, see if you like it, and sign up if you do. I will be back next month with office hours again, asking questions. Hopefully my comments will work because that's like my favorite part of this. I don't know why it wasn't tonight. Although I feel like people rewatching this will be annoyed by my keep talking about it because it's not there. They're not in the live stream to be bothered by it. If I were I'm gonna leave you with one thing that I think you can do right now besides making sure that your question has a job. The thing that I think most teachers could do right now to improve their questioning is, there's a comment from Karen. So maybe the comments are working and just nobody had anything they wanted to say. Thank you, Karen. I'm glad that you've liked that course. And Karen and Christina, let me know if you're on the email list. So, because I'm just curious, because if you are on the email list and you got my email yesterday, you know why I'm asking. Okay, so what's the number one thing that teachers can do to improve questioning? I think the number one thing that teachers can do to improve questioning, especially for gifted learners, is to make sure that the question is not embarrassing to answer. So thank you, Karen. So a lot of times teachers ask questions where especially high ability kids are like, why should I even answer? Like, this is so silly. Like, it's embarrassing to even be asked. And in the questioning course, I give an example of this, this kind of question that's kind of silly, but I'll give some serious ones. What do I mean by that? What do I mean by that is are questions like, what happens in the beginning of this chapter? Or what is the operator in this equation? These basic low-level knowing and understanding questions, not even understanding, these are just knowing, these kinds of questions are, what happens is, it's like everybody knows the answer, right? Everybody knows the answer. And so nobody wants to answer because it seems silly to answer. So don't ask those questions that most, if not all of your students know the answer to. Ask questions that are, to the greatest extent possible, open-ended, so that you don't just get like yes or no or 11 or he went to the store or something like that. Just answers that can be like that. Ask questions where students can put a little bit of themselves in it, right? So how is what happened at the beginning of the chapter similar to something that's happened to you in your own life? It's that easy, right? You can still ask what happened in this chapter, but just phrase it in a different way. So stop asking questions that everyone knows the answer to, or almost everyone knows the answer to, or everyone who wasn't in a coma knows the answer to, and ask a question, whether you're adding a scenario, whether you're connecting it to them. And obviously, I'm a big believer that depth and complexity will help you do this. But yes, Sean is right? Respect that learner. Respect the learner in the question. And so don't ask questions that they all know the answer to. If you have a question that you need to check for understanding, ratchet it up, right? Say like, how we used this operator. Let's make another. Can you make another equation using the same operator that was used in this question? I'm just throwing out stuff, right? But like, so rather than saying, like, what are the 5 stages of cell division? Just saying, of the 5, can we come up with a different acronym, or can we come up with a way to remember instead of just IPMAT, right? Like we want a better question. And the way that we do that is by not asking questions everyone knows the answer to. So I see comments from Christina, Karen, and Shauna. And I know that Karen, because she told me, is on the email list. I feel like I recognize Shauna's name, but I don't recognize Christina's name from before. I feel like I would recognize her name because Mann is such a great German last name, and ich studiere Deutsch. So there we go. If either of you are in my email list, either shoot me an email or comment here. I want to thank you so much for joining me tonight. I hope this has been just a little bit helpful. If you have any questions that you want answered, or if you have a question that you would like me to play with a little bit, or you want to work it in a workshop model like this, just go ahead, either email it to me or post it in a comment, and I will see it and look at it next month when we do our office hours. So if you want to know when office hours are in, so Shauna is too. So if you want to know when office hours are, the easiest way to do that is to go to giftedguru.com/subscribe. And then you can get emails because I send them out in advance. Also, I schedule these in advance on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And so if you set like notifications, it will even send you a notification that that's happening. So thank you guys so much for joining in tonight. And I hope that this was useful, looking through some real teachers, real questions. Nothing was made up for tonight. These were ones that really got sent to me. So hopefully that was fun for you. It was definitely fun for me. And I will look forward to seeing you guys either in your inbox or in the next office hours. So have a good night and a good month.